Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. Man is either chained and trapped to the world, or he transcends the world. Transcendent, transcendence is an important word, and we must recognize the meaning of the word. But more than recognizing the meaning, we have to recognize the implications of what transcendence is. Let's use some simple examples. If one is prejudiced, let's say against race, and they're prejudiced against a certain race, if they can end that prejudice, that would mean they have transcended the prejudice against race. Let's say they're caught up in one specific religion and are prejudiced against every other religion. If they can break the prejudice against other religions, then it can be said they've transcended the prejudice against other religions. There are so many things that we are attached to that we can transcend. And we need to understand the complexity of what it is that holds us in that space and what it is that releases us from that space. We are subject to our mind and desire. Mind and desire are both part of the intellectual process, which means they're at the first three levels of consciousness. They are not transcendent into wisdom. Wisdom is transcendent consciousness. Mind and desire and intellect are mundane consciousness. And what I mean by mundane is that it's a consciousness that's attached to the world and to worldly things. And the mind's focus is on the world, and the mind's desire is on the world. And ordinary man works like this. He's given a problem, he's given a situation, he interfaces with his senses in the worldly things, and then he desires certain things within that worldly framework, and then the mind spends its time trying to bring about conclusions that manipulate the form so that man's desires can be fulfilled. So man spends a lifetime manipulating form in his own favor. I see, I want, I go through the process of getting. I see gold, I want to become rich. I see jewelry, I want jewelry. I need jewelry. I go about doing what's necessary in order to get it. To transcend means to go beyond the cycle of mind and desire, to go beyond the grasping of the world. And for each of us, that grasping is defined in a different way because we all have our inclinations and they come from what we are taught when we were young and the experiences that we have while we are young and the understandings we have while we are young. As long as our training involves the world and capturing the world, we will be tied to the world. And as long as we are tied to the world, we are chained. We can't transcend. We can't go beyond. So Allah implemented on our behalf certain practices to try and break our attachment to the world. One of these practices is prayer. Now, prayer goes on at 5 different times during the day. And at each of these times, when one is supposed to do prayer, before one does prayer, one is supposed to do ablutions. Ablutions is the use of water to try and wash away the worldly connection at that moment, so that when you go into prayer, you are not attached to the world and you've entered into an open space. You've entered into a free space. You've entered into a space where the influence of the mind, the influence of desire, and the influence of the world is not as strong on you. Water has a way of reducing that influence. Showering has a way of reducing that influence. Bathing has a way of reducing that influence. And ablutions have a way of reducing that influence. Now, for prayer to become authentic and for prayer to become real, there must be a connection. There must be a connection between man, the prayer, and our Lord. And man has to understand that connection and has to intend that connection. So before we begin prayer, we should have the intention that our mind and desire no longer infiltrate us, but we now function from the heart and function directly towards God. So to do real prayer, we have to intend God, and we have to intend that that which we do in prayer is directed towards God and is pure. So we need to establish a pure state within us, and in that pure state, surrender to Allah and do the prayer in that state of surrender. Only if prayer is done within that state of surrender to God is actual prayer going on. Now, people who've gone and watched people come into the mosque, they'll often see something like this. Somebody will rush in and in 3 minutes finish their prayers and then rush out. they feel this sense of obligation to do the prayer, but they don't feel a sense of obligation to detach from the world while they do the prayer. They see it as an obligation in the same way that going to work is an obligation, the same way that eating is an obligation. It's become part of what they do. But in order to bring it up to a level of transcendence, we have to detach from the world while we do it. And Allah has given us 5 times during the day when we are supposed to stop what we're doing and stop at a particular time and do the prayer. And the stoppage means just that. Whatever you're doing, stop. Whatever you're doing is less important than your connection to Allah. Your connection to Allah is at the foremost of importance. Your connection to Allah is the most important thing in your life. And for that reason, whatever else you're doing is not as important as that. And so in that moment, we have the opportunity to transcend the world. Now, transcending the world means so many different things. It means working on our relationship with God as opposed to working on our relationships in the world. It means working on our relationship with God as opposed to working on acquiring the fruits of the world. It means working on our relationship with God as opposed to beginning to hoard the world, to collect the world, to store the world, to have a bank account, to have possessions. There is a moment when we become free of these things. And even though we may have them, at least internally, we're free of these things. So you have an external prayer and you have an internal prayer. The external prayer is the different postures and positions that you take during prayer. And by the way, these are very good exercises for you. But in addition, there is an internal portion. Now, for many people, this internal portion doesn't ever occur because they recite externally and they do the postures externally. And the entire process is an external process. But for some, they understand the nature of the internal process, and they understand that in addition to the external process, something has to go on internally. Something has to change. While we are walking through the world, we have a point of view. And that point of view usually has to do with our interaction with the sensory perceptions that we are gathering while we walk through the world. So, can we take a moment off from sensory perception? Can we take a moment off from sensory interaction? Can we take a moment off and deprive ourselves of our senses? As we deprive ourselves of our senses, we can go internally. If our senses are very, very powerful, and in full force, it's very difficult to turn inwards. So we stay externalized and we begin to worry about minutiae. We begin to worry, are our feet standing in the right direction? Are our bows appropriate? Is our hand placement appropriate? What makes the prayer appropriate is the appropriate nature of your internal situation at the moment that you pray. Now, of course, you should try to do everything else correctly, but where your focus should be is on your relationship with God. This is the true transcendence. Now, if we are truly to become humans, 5 times prayer is not enough. 5 times prayer is an entry level attempt to know God. 5 times prayer is a ritualistic attempt to understand reality. But reality faces us at every moment. Reality is constantly with us. And the question is, what is our reality? Is our reality our sensual interface with the world? Or is our reality a constant interface with God? Bawa says to us that we are to internally repeat La ilaha illallah, La ilaha illallah, La ilaha illallah with every breath. That it is to become a part of us that is automatic. And people say, well, how can you do that? And his response used to be that when you pump a well, it takes a while to prime it, but then after a while, the water continues to run. So if we can prime La ilaha illallah, La ilaha illallah into ourselves on a constant basis, then we change the nature of who we are. How much time do we spend with our consciousness focused on the world through mind and desire? And how much time do we spend in a heart connection with God where we have bypassed mind and desire? Now, this doesn't mean mind and desire has stopped. It just means that our listening to what it's babbling about has stopped, and our reaction to what it's babbling about has stopped. In a schizophrenic mind, the mind is so powerful that the person has to do what he's told. It's as if it's a command that is beyond his ability to deny. In the transcendent mind, in the transcendent, not the transcendent mind, in the transcendent being, the mind is easy to ignore because the individual understands the truth. Now, to the mind, the past is the same as the present. So if you are in thought about things that have happened to you, they are as if they were occurring right now. So what you're doing is you're constantly repeating your past life over and over and over and over. And this becomes an obsession in some people's lives. And they can't get beyond that obsession. If they can't get beyond that obsession of repeating certain things that happened to them in the past, they can't become transcendent. they also can't focus on God because their past has enveloped them and their past has chained them. So we need to begin to understand what transcendent means. We need to focus on that and create an intention to be transcendent. Then we come into the realm of now. The Sufi is known as the son of the moment, which means the Sufi lives in the moment. He doesn't live in the past and he doesn't live in the future. Now, understand that living in the future is a hallucination. You don't know the future, so how can you possibly live in the future? Worrying is sometimes defined as feeling future pain now. In other words, your mind has taken some obsession you're involved in, some situation you're involved in, and concluded that it's not going to turn out well, and you then suffer the consequences of it not turning out well, even though it hasn't turned yet at all. So, what to do? Well, as we sit still, we have to be cognizant of the fact that we are in two worlds simultaneously, at least. One world is whatever's going on in our mind at the time we're sitting still. It's taking us to all kinds of places. The mind travels at the speed of light. If you are in, say, the United States, and you have traveled, let's say, to India in the past, or Sri Lanka, or Africa, or anywhere, the mind is capable of going there and being there while you're sitting still in America. This is the power that the mind has. And this is the power over you that the mind has. Understand that the mind is not looking for liberation. The mind is happy living within the world and doing the things that one does in the world. The mind is happy in the mud. The mind is happy in the dung heap. The mind is happy in filth. The mind and the dog of desire are happy gathering the world, enjoying the world, and finding treasures within the world, and thinking that these treasures of the world will satisfy the mind. Now, the advertising industry has figured this out, and they figured out that if they send messages to you about things that you need, your mind will pick it up and begin to obsess over it. And if they can send it to you often enough, you'll continue to obsess until you somehow interact with what they're identifying. Why do you think they repeat Coca-Cola ads every 20 minutes on television? Why does McDonald's repeat its ads every 20 minutes on television? Why do the car ads repeat every 20 minutes on television? They repeat to set up a framework within you that you somehow need whatever they're advertising, and they set up a methodology within you that will go and try to possess that. And they use so many different means to make it become important to you. Conspicuous consumption is as important to many people as utilitarian value. In other words, they buy things so that other people know they have them, as opposed to the fact that they actually need them. Like, do you really need an expensive car? Or does an expensive car show off better who you are? Do you really need an expensive house? Or does an expensive house show off better who you are? Somebody figured this out in the 1800s, and he wrote a book called The Theory of Conspicuous Consumption. And if any of you are interested, his name was Thorstein Veblen, and he's a Norwegian economist. And it's an interesting book. Anyway, we need to downgrade our desire. We need to downgrade our involvement with our mind. And how do we do this? We do it through wisdom. And how does wisdom do it? Well, God is without form. Everything in the world has form. So what is it that the mind deals with? The mind deals with form. The mind deals with using form, acquiring form, manipulating form. All kinds of machinations with form. The mind wants to own things. You can only own form. And so the mind creates situations where you can get into ownership. But if you want to transcend this, you have to begin to look at things that don't have form. And part of transcending is not living inside your mind, living outside of your mind, understanding that you are not your mind. So to live in the moment, you have to live outside your mind. Otherwise, you will constantly be in the past or in the future. The mind is incapable of stasis within the moment, because if it were in stasis within the moment, there's nothing for it to do, because the moment exists as it is. It doesn't exist with all the mind manipulation that the past has and the future has. What will happen? How did it happen? When will it happen? What am I going to do about it? Well, in the moment, there's just the moment. So the attachments that we have to everything that we've touched in our life works against us being in the moment, especially if we love those things. It is said, that which you love will kill you. And what's meant by that is, that which you love will keep you trapped within your mind and within doing things on behalf of that which you love within the world. To escape from that, we have to give up our attachments to whatever it is that we love within the world. What is, and we have to ask questions like this: I'm prejudiced against other religions. Why? What is it that makes me an adherent to one religion without understanding the exalted nature of any other religion? Race. What is it that makes me hold on to my race as if it was more important than every other race? Why do I think that? Is it because of my egocentric needs, What is it that I want? What is it that I get out of it? Why do I think that? Why do I need extraordinary wealth? What is it that makes me want that? So we have to look at our desire, look at what you want, and ask yourself, why do I want this? And then you have to be honest about your reasoning. I want this because it makes me powerful. I want this because it makes me famous. I want this because it makes me more comfortable with myself. I want this, and then you can put in your reason. But analyze these things. Whatever the Sheikh gives us, we have to analyze. And the Sheikh explains all of these things to us. The Sheikh explains mind and desire. The Sheikh explains the nature of the earth. The Sheikh explains the nature of fire and water and ether and air and all of the different influences that all of these things have. But in order for us to understand it, we have to analyze each one of these things. We can't just go on without analyzing, because if we do, we will be trapped in mind and desire. And understand that this is the goal of Satan. Not necessarily to have you commit great offenses, great crimes, but to have you trapped between mind and desire, to have you trapped within the glitter of this world and your attachment to the glitter of this world, to have your desire attach itself to every simple little thing it sees, thinking that somehow this will give you some kind of satisfaction. Now, for some people, after going through this circle of mind, desire, and attempt to find satisfaction, this circle, after going through it, and after going through 50 different machinations of it, they realize they've always ended in the same place, dissatisfied, without peace, without contentment, without tranquility. And so they stop and they look in another direction. For some people, the myth that there's something to find here never extinguishes itself. It continues to rear its head and say, if you have money, if you just get a little bit more, you'll be satisfied. If you have real estate, if you just get a little bit more, you'll be satisfied. If you have fame, if you just get a little bit more, you'll be satisfied. Whatever it is that your inclination is, Satan will come in the back of your mind and tell you a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. And finally, you'll get there, but you never get there. But then you hear again, a little bit more, a little bit more. We have to be wise enough. We have to understand enough that we know that this little bit of more doesn't work. We have to get to the point where we become grateful, where we become satisfied with what we have. The mind is constantly, through desire, urging us to get more of the world. This urge to get more of the world is because we can't find tranquility, because we can't be satisfied, because we haven't reached completeness. But if we can find satisfaction within ourselves, then the mind can't drive us. If we can find tranquility within ourselves, then the mind can't drive us. If we can find contentment within ourselves, then the mind can't drive us. Now, there are lots of methods for becoming satisfied. There are lots of methods to finding tranquility. There are lots of methods to finding peace within yourself. One of them is to begin to contemplate, where can peace be found? And what are all the places that I've looked that peace isn't found? Peace, salam, is one of the names of God. So if we're going to find peace, we have to find God. And when we reach that conclusion, then we stop chasing the world and we start looking towards God and contemplating God. So to get into the moment, we have to leave the past and we have to leave the future. What exists in the moment as it is? God. So we have to contemplate the fact that God exists and God is with us and he's with us at this moment, and all is right in creation and all is right in the world. And if anything is not right, it's because of our inability to understand what is correct. So we have to believe that everything is fine. Everything is correct. We just need to get ourselves in tune with that which is correct. And if we can bring ourselves in tune with an understanding of correctness, then we'll be in the moment, then we'll be free of the vagaries and influences of the world. And if we're free of the vagaries and the influences of the world, then we have the opportunity to turn towards the qualities of God. Now, my teacher, your teacher, Bawa Muhaiyaddeen, was a Katub. He was a manifestation of God's qualities in human form, a very rare occurrence in this world. And when you were in his presence, you could feel the strength of the manifestation of God's qualities being there. So one method for finding peace is to contemplate his face. Get a picture of Bawa and just look at it. In looking at that picture, you will be transitioned from the world into reality. Reality is God's presence, and God's presence is always here. We just need to find a pathway to it. And one of the pathways to it is through the Sheikh, and through the acceptance of the Sheikh, and through the qualities of the Sheikh, and through contemplating his qualities and his interaction with us, which was always kind and always loving and always transcendent. He wasn't bothered by the problems of the world. He was beyond the problems of the world. He was in the moment, and he was in the formless qualities of our Creator. And those qualities are the actual reality in existence, not what we see. So it needs to be understood that being overwhelmed by the senses keeps us from the truth. Being overwhelmed by the senses keeps us from reality. Being overwhelmed by the senses stops us from who we truly are. We are a part of God covered in a wrapping. And as long as we consider the wrapping who we are missing the point of reality. We are creating a separate reality that is an illusion and a hallucination. That is a made up reality that is what the world does. The world does it in its politics. The world does it in its heroes. The world does it in the things that it holds sacred. The world does it with its movie stars. The world does it with its rich men. The world does it with all the things that the world holds as important. So somehow we have to separate from what the world holds as important to what the sheikh held as important, to what the world holds as important, to what God holds as important. And what God holds as important is for you to become like him, because he expects you to be one of his children. One of his children means that you have acquired his qualities. And if you have acquired his qualities, then he considers you one of his, and he gives you the title of being a member of his family. And then merging can occur, and he can give you the keys to his kingdom. This is what happens when you enter into the moment. This is what happens when you enter into the truth. This is what happens when you leave the world. And this is what is meant by dying before death for Sufis. To die to the world and become alive in the truth. To die to the world and become alive in God. To die to the truth and become alive in love and in compassion, in mercy and in justice. To become alive in truth. And if we can do that, then we will have conquered this world, and we'll have conquered Satan, and we'll be on our way to entrance into God's kingdom. May it be so for each and every one of us. Ameen. Ameen. Ya Rabbil Alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.